The next map that you can see shows the main rivers of England. Well, this is the best map I could find with the rivers. I'm quite sorry it does not include Wales or Scotland. We'll eventually talk about their rivers as well, but the longest rivers are in England. It is quite understandable. The mountain rivers are usually faster but shorter. They do not have very long to travel, and the longer rivers flow on the lowlands and flatlands. So this is basically what you can see on this map. Now a little bit of trivia, something like a kind of question from some sort of television show. I don't know, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Like, what's the longest river in the United Kingdom? And everybody tends to say, this is the River Thames. This is the river that flows through London. But in reality, there is one river that is a few kilometers longer. It's not as navigable and as wide as the River Thames at its widest, but it is actually longer, and the name of this river is the River Severn. Not like the number, it's Severn. You can see it on the map. It starts its life on the border of Wales and England, and it flows in England there. And apparently, well, it's not very evident from this map, but apparently the River Severn is 354 kilometers long, whereas the River Thames is 346 kilometers long. So Severn wins by a couple of kilometers. Then we have some more longest rivers in the United Kingdom. The third one is River Trent, just below 300 kilometers. You may want to try and find it. It's on the east side of England, and it flows into the North Sea. So the sea that is on the eastern side of the British Isles. So the River Trent. There are some interesting smaller rivers that are linked to the River Trent. For example, the River Derwent, which is quite interesting. We'll talk about it later on. This is the area where the Industrial Revolution started. So this is the subsidiary river, quite interesting in its own right. Then what we have is River Wye. River Wye almost shares its estuary with Severn. It is also situated on the border between Wales and England. It is, as you can see, not very long on this map, but it's very winding, and this adds to the overall length, which is 250 kilometers. Number 5 is Great Ouse, river called the Great Ouse, which is on the flatlands of eastern England, as you can see here, above London. This is another long river. The longest man-made canal is at 204 kilometers, and it links Leeds and Liverpool. Leeds and Liverpool Canal. This is the longest canal, but there are many more. We'll talk about them when we discuss the geography and culture of central England. The longest river in Scotland is called River Tay, and another one, River Clyde. But there is one more thing I would like to draw your attention to. You don't really have to learn all those names of rivers, but we will encounter most of them at some point. And you are probably all familiar with the name of the River Avon. Stratford-upon-Avon, the birthplace of William Shakespeare. And if you look at this map of English rivers here and want to find the River Avon, you will see that it has a very strange geography. Apparently, it flows in 3 parts. There are 2 parts named Avon that flow towards Wales, and another one that flows towards the English Channel. And what's going on? I was quite puzzled. I never really thought about that. I thought there was one river called Avon, and this is the one that flows through Stratford-upon-Avon. But apparently, I checked that. There are around 10 different rivers in England and Scotland, and each of them is called Avon. The reason is that in the old Celtic language spoken on the British Isles, Avon meant river. So for the local people who never traveled far from their place of origin, they didn't bother to give the name to the local river, they just called it a river. So when the outsiders started coming, starting with the Romans, and perhaps they wanted to ask the locals what's the name of this river, they said Avon, which meant a river. So here we have like 10 different rivers being called a river. So it happens to some other names as well. If you are watchful here, you can find, for example, 2 different rivers called Derwent. One is the subsidiary of the River Trent, and another one is further to the north. And apparently it also meant something in the original Proto-Celtic language. Something I think related to the oak trees or oak forest, if I remember correctly. So this was the river that flows through the oak forest. And because there were many oak forests, we have several rivers named Derwent. So this is a little bit of tricky thing, something to perhaps draw your attention to the peculiarities of Britain, and I would say perhaps to one. I'm hesitating to call it a stereotype, but a kind of national feature, that if something works, you do not change it. So if there is a name of a river, and everybody knows this river by this name, you will not change it because somewhere on the other side of the island there is a river with the same name. The locals know which Avon or which Derwent they mean, because they usually mean the local one. It's only the outsiders, those who want to draw, let's say, farther-reaching conclusions that that may be troubled with that. So yeah, that's a little thing. I never noticed that until this year. So that's the first thing I learned from you. So thank you. I hope we are continuing to learn together. The next map. This is the kind of map which I liked. This is a physical map of the United Kingdom with all of the names of islands and also the geographical features here, plus the names of cities and towns, the major cities and towns in the British Isles. Here another piece of trivia. What's the difference, geographically speaking, between a city and a town? Of course it's population, cities are larger, but there is also one more important thing. You can have relatively small places like Chester, for example, which are still cities, although there are some towns that are bigger in terms of population and size. The difference apparently is in the fact that the city must have a cathedral. If it has a cathedral, it's a city, however small. If it doesn't have a cathedral, it's a town, however big. So we are going to encounter many of those names, and actually when I get my handout back, there are some cities and perhaps some towns as well marked on this blank map for you to recognize, but eventually you'll recognize them. So let's look at this general map here once again, and then there will be some close-ups. So what we can see here, for example, are the names of the seas and channels and other areas of water that are quite important. Of course, the British Isles are islands. They haven't always been islands. It happened after the glacial period, and this was quite a gradual process. With the melting of the ice caps, Britain became an island. So first it was a kind of completely united with continental Europe. Then when the ice started melting, there became a kind of marshy bridge between the continental Europe and Great Britain, and then even this bridge was flooded. So what we have is the English Channel in the south, with the narrowest place between Dover and Calais in the Strait of Dover. The Strait of Dover, this is the narrowest place. This is you sometimes hear about brave athletic people swimming across the English Channel, and this is exactly where they swim, because this is the narrowest point. If you wonder how far this is around 32 kilometers. So I can imagine it's a swimmable distance. I'm not sure I would survive such a swim, although I believe I'm quite a strong swimmer, but that's the narrowest point. So we have the English Channel with the Strait of Dover at the narrowest point. On the east we have the North Sea. I already mentioned that we have the North Sea. Then we have the Atlantic Ocean on the west, but it's mostly accessible off the coast of Scotland and the Scottish Islands. We'll talk about the Scottish Islands in a little moment, because well, there is Ireland there. So we have some more areas of the sea and two more channels between Ireland and Great Britain. So the main body of water between Ireland and Great Britain, the one where the Isle of Man is situated, is called the Irish Sea. The Irish Sea, it's kind of between, and it is connected by two channels, so two narrowings. In the north, it is the North Channel. In the south, it's not the South Channel, it's St. George's Channel. We'll talk about national symbols next week, so you will know that St. George is the patron saint of England. And below St. George's Channel, we also have a smaller body of water, so off the southern coast of Ireland and the western coast of Wales and Cornwall, and this part is called the Celtic Sea. So there we go. You can also see on this general map some archipelagos, and two of them are not included in the general map. They are in the corners because they are, one is a bit more to the north, one is a bit more to the south. So the one in the south, we have the Channel Islands, and they are also crown dependencies, so they have a degree of self-government, but they are part of the United Kingdom, in a similar way as the Isle of Man, really. Then we have the Scottish Islands. The furthest ones to the north are Shetland Islands. Then closer to the Scottish shores in the north are Orkney Islands. We are going to talk about them in greater detail. They have quite an interesting history and geology. Politically, they became Scottish possessions when one of the early Scottish kings married the daughter of a Norwegian king. This was her dowry. She brought the Shetlands and the Orkneys. However, if we look at the history, especially in the Orkneys, there are lots of wonderful prehistoric monuments. We are going to talk about them, definitely. There's one UNESCO site there. I haven't been there. I've been to Scotland, but never really to the Highlands. So there we go. Then off the western coast of Scotland, we have the Hebrides. So we have the Outer Hebrides and the Inner Hebrides. There are many islands with some larger ones like Lewis or Skye or Islay. It's not pronounced Islay. This is actually what I thought for a very, very long time, because Queen Victoria had a dog by that name. And I thought this was a kind of pun that the dog was such a predatory creature. But apparently the doggy was named after one of the islands in the Inner Hebrides, and it's pronounced Islay. And they make very good whiskey there, apparently. So that's a little bit of trivia. We'll look at those islands in close-up in a little moment. Two more islands that are perhaps a bit less visible on this scale is one island which is just off the coast of northern Wales. This is called Anglesey. There is a bridge connection. There's a beautiful historical bridge designed by one of the great engineers of the Industrial Revolution called Thomas Telford, and it links the island of Anglesey with mainland Wales over a kind of narrow strip of water called the Menai Straits. The Menai Straits, you'll see it on the map in a little moment. And another interesting island is in the English Channel, very close to the coast, actually at the level of more or less Portsmouth. The name of the island is the Isle of Wight. And it's not connected to the land. You have to take a ferry. It's very much worth a visit. It's a beautiful little island. with one of the residences of Queen Victoria. She had her summer palace there called Osborne House, so we are going to see it later on. So let's now look at some of the close-ups of this very map. So, so the first part shows you the London area and the lowlands zone, as you can see, with many of the place names. You can see the Isle of Wight better. The little strait that divides the Isle of Wight from England is called the Solvent Strait. Solvent. Some important places, probably, well, London, definitely, we are going to talk about London a lot, but some interesting places along the coast. Brighton, for example, one of the original holiday spots. There is a very interesting holiday palace, summer palace of George IV from the period when he was still Prince Regent. It's called the Royal Pavilion. It's in Brighton. As you can see, it's very near London. Generally, I read somewhere that no place in Great Britain is further than 3 hours drive from the sea. So the sea is a very important focus, it's a very important presence in British culture, British history, and if you look at the coastline of Britain, it's very varied, it's very long because of those little islands and bays and headlands and peninsulas. Some parts of the coast, especially the parts in Cornwall, are actually UNESCO World Heritage Site for nature, the Jurassic Coast. We are going to talk about it in a little moment. Here what we can see, among other things, is one of those larger bays. As you can see, it's in the northern part of this close-up. It's called the Wash. It's quite big. This is where the river Great Ouse flows, as you can see, hopefully as well. It's one of the rivers that flow into the North Sea in the Wash. So it's one of the bigger bays. Some more interesting cities here, as you can see, Norwich, Cambridge, Oxford, so the historical, beautiful university towns. As you can see, relatively near London. Further away in central England we have Coventry and Leicester. Further to the north here we have Nottingham and Sheffield. As you can see, the size of the names of the place names, it's relative to the size of the city, but still quite a lot of interesting places here. Let's look at the other close-up, and this is the other part in the south. So here we have Cornwall Peninsula with with the place situated furthest to the west called Land's End. Land's End. This is really the end of land here. There is also a little, it's not visible in this close-up, you can probably see it in the general map. I made it too big here. A little archipelago just off Land's End. It's called Scilly Islands. Scilly Islands, not like silly stupid. It's SCILLY. What we have in Cornwall are again uplands and hills and some bays. It's one of the picturesque, quite mysterious places. There is the kind of their own atmosphere. I never got very far. The furthest we went was Dorchester, which you can see here, which is an interesting little town connected to a figure of a late Victorian novelist, Thomas Hardy. And what you can see here are some interesting places like the city of Bath, the old historical Roman place, actually going back to pre-Roman times, but famous for the Roman bath. This is again a little trivia thing. You have a list of cities and which one is not situated on the coast, and of course it's Bath. It has nothing to do with sea bathing. The name derives from mineral springs that flow there. And you can see also the close-up of Wales here with the regional capital of Cardiff, some more larger cities like Newport or Swansea. In the south, actually this is because the mining industry and the Industrial Revolution happened mostly in the south of Wales because of the natural resources. You'll see them in a little while. So the habitation grew there. You can see the island of Anglesey better. There is a road, there is a bridge. This is one of the places that I have visited. Very interesting. There is an old medieval castle. It's not a ruin, it was never completed. We'll talk about it later on. So we have the Cambrian Mountains. I hope you can see them. We have this little triangular thing marking the peak of Snowdon. Once again, we have Bristol Channel, so this body of water connecting the estuaries of some rivers, like the River Severn or the River Wye, which you can just about see here as well. So the city of Bristol, it is in England. It's one of the cities that also grew immensely. They had their historical moment in the 18th century. It's one of the cities, like Liverpool, that unfortunately grew on slave trade. So if you think that Britain was free from slavery, think again. We'll talk about it probably later on. We can just see the big conurbation of Birmingham as well. We'll talk about the larger cities in a little moment. So here we have the close-up of Wales. Let's now move to central England and the border between England and Wales. Perhaps one more thing. The border between Wales and England, it's more or less, if you draw a line between Chester and Newport, this is where you get the border. There is a line of hills, so there is a kind of natural geographical border. There is also a very old historical early medieval monument called Offa's Dyke, which was a kind of dike or ditch or a kind of earth wall that was ordered by one of the one of the Welsh kings, King Offa,